Good morning, Morai Rabotai, Bruchim Abayim. We are continuing on Masechet Rosh Hashanah, and we left off on the bottom of Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, 8 lines up from the bottom of the Amud. Today's Amud is being learned as a Zchut Refuah Shlema for Daniel Moshe ben Farangis Abraham, Rachel Simcha Bat Nahid. They should both have a Refuah Shlema. This Amud is also being learned as a Zchut for the Shei and Mapubi families who have graciously dedicated this month's learning of the community. We are in the middle of a discussion. The last thing that we learned in the Gemara was the sources that we had for two different Amoraim going back and forth, and Rabbi Yirmiyah, who had initially asked a question of how do you know that Chazal could possibly have known the difference in the timeline, and we're talking about a few days worth of timeline between when the Tvu'ah and the produce is 1/3 ripened and fully ripened, because the Gemara said Chazal knew that anything that is harvested on Sukkot bevadai already had ripened 1/3 of its growth by Rosh Hashanah 15 days before. Rabbi Yirmiyah said, how can you possibly know that? That anything, you could say a cloud, anything that grew to the level of harvest by Chag HaSukkot, that it already had 1/3 of its growth by Rosh Hashanah, impossible. Then Rabbi Zera told him, he says, how many times did I tell you not to say this? All the shiurim of Chazal is like this. They tell you a shiur and that's what it is. Then Rabbi Yirmiyah went back himself and said, you know what? After pondering this further, I think I was wrong, because you see, from something that Rav Kana was asked from his students, you see that Chazal actually did know, even to the minutest details of the growth patterns of Tvu'ah, of produce. How so? Because the Jews went into Eretz Yisrael the first time, the time of Yehoshua, on 10th of Nisan, historically. And the Pasuk says that they brought Korban Omer, which was always brought on 16th of Nisan. So it was harvested 5 days afterwards. And yet, it must have been that this is a produce that was it was ripened in the Reshut, in the ownership of the Jews. So they started having a claim ownership over Eretz Yisrael 5 days before, and it can't have been that the produce was ripened beforehand, because that's already the Tevuah of Nochri, that's considered a produce of a goy. So that cannot have been the case. It must have been that it grew at least hitting the line of 1/3 of its growth of being ripened in the reshut, in the domain of the Jews. And says Rabbi Yirmiyah, you see from here that even in 5 days it could be determined, and Chazal knew that beforehand it was not 1/3, afterwards was 1/3, and hence Korban HaOmer, that was grown in the reshut of the Jews as soon as they entered Eretz Yisrael, right? Then the Gemara said, wait, maybe nothing was grown. How do you know it was 1/3? Maybe they came to Eretz Yisrael, and that's how they knew, because it was 0 to 60, right? It was mamash. Rabbi says, 0 to 60, can that be in 5 days? And then what I said, wait, once you add it, if you have a problem with 0 to 60 in 5 days, why don't you have a problem from 5 to 60? From 1/3, even 20 to 60, or however you call that, right? You're okay with saying that it was 1/4 ripened before the 10th day of Nisan, and by 15th was already completely ripened. You're okay saying that. But you're not okay saying that it was 1/6 right? Or it was, from 0 to, how can that make sense? If it was 1/3, right before 1/3, and you're okay in 5 days, so what do you have to say? You have to say that the patterns of growth when Klal Yisrael came to Eretz Yisrael was miraculous. Eretz Tzvi, Ketiv Ba, we say Eretz Tzvi, Eretz Yisrael is exampled to a Ratz Kasevi, fast, quick, right? Like a deer. That even the growth of things was, tremendously blessed. So once you say that, we could also suggest that it was not even 1/3, clearly not 1/3, and therefore you don't learn anything from this pasuk, said the Gemara. Rabbi Yirmiyah cannot bring any raya from the psukim of Jews going to Eretz Yisrael in the very beginning, because that was a miraculous reality. Now, so therefore we're back to what we said before. Now, what we said before, in a quick recap, was that the proof that we had for this whole thing of 1/3, because the question of the Gemara initially was, where do you get this concept, this halacha, that we go after 1/3 of its growth, right? We said, but tfuah, when you differentiate what year it is from, is based on when it hit the mark of 1/3 of its growth. If 1/3 of the growth was before Rosh Hashanah, Hazaku Baruch, this is the last year's thing. If it was afterwards, it's next year's, right? The mark is 1/3 of the growth. So where do you get that from? Where do you see that it's 1/3, right? And we wanted to bring a raya from the extra Chag HaAsif, because it says Chag HaAsif when it says Be'osfecha migornecha. Right? So we say, Chag HaAsif is extra, because the same pasuk, literally 3 words later, it says Be'osfecha migornecha, when you gather your crops. So why do you have to say Chag HaAsif? And when I say, must be, it doesn't mean Asif means Katzir. Okay, great. So what does that mean? And the Gemara darshin that, this is obviously speaking about Sukkot, that whatever is Chag HaKatzir, whatever is ready to be harvested by Chag HaSukkot, the pasuk there calls it, right, Betzet HaShana, that is from last year. Whatever is ready to be harvested by Sukkot is considered last year's Tvuah. In those 15 days from Rosh Hashanah until Chag HaSukkot, they grow, and the Gemara said, we know that by Rosh Hashanah already had 1/3. That was the whole proof that we had so far. So far, in the bottom of the Daf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, if you would ask me, how in the world do you know that we go after 1/3? I would tell you, because the pasuk calls Chag HaSukkot Chag HaKatzir, to indicate that whatever, because it's an extra word Chag HaAsif, which I don't know, so I darshin Asif means Katzir, and that's coming to indicate that whatever is ready to be harvested on Chag HaSukkot already had 1/3 of its growth by Rosh Hashanah, which is the cutoff line of the years, right? Now the Gemara is going to destroy that. Ready? Says the Gemara. Matkifla Rab Chanina. Rab Chanina asked, and this is, wait a second, very nice and beautiful. But, Umi Matzid Amrat, Daya Asif Katziru. Is it even possible, is it sayable that when the pasuk says Chag HaAsif, regarding Chag HaSukkot, that doesn't really mean Asif, it means Katzir? The only reason that you would say such a thing is because Chag HaAsif is extra, right? That's what we said. Because it's extra, because the end of the pasuk says, Be'osfecha migornecha, so I know Asif. So the words Chag HaAsif, Be'moed Chag HaAsif is extra, I could darshan Chag HaKatzir, right? That's what we said. You're forgetting what we learned together as Amud Yomi, says the Gemara, in Masechet Sukkah Daf Yud Bet. What did we say in Masechet Sukkah Daf Yud Bet? The Sukkah gurus here. We said, Chag HaAsif is coming to tell you, Be'osvecha migornecha u'miikvecha, Ve'haketiv be'osvecha migornecha u'miikvecha, that we learn from the words Be'osvecha migornecha u'miikvecha that bepesolet ve'amar mor bepesolet goren ve'yekev hakatuv medaber. How do you know what schach you could use in Chag HaSukkot, be'osvecha migornecha mi'ikvecha, the Gemara darshened in Sukkah Daf Yud Bet, that you need pesolet goren ve'yekev. We learned the material of the schach of Sukkah from this very pasuk. Don't forget that. So therefore, for you to say that this is extra, that is a long shot. It's at all not extra. Because I very much need this pasuk, be'osvecha migornecha, to tell me what material is kasher, what's not kasher for the schach of Sukkah. So don't you tell me that this is extra. I need be'osvecha migornecha u'ikvecha for schach of Sukkah, and Chag HaAsif I need for itself. Right? That's a very powerful checkmate question. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Zera, Taka accepts the checkmate. Rabbi Zera says, Hamilta havai biyadan. We thought we had this. We thought we had the raya, the proof of where we learned this whole shlish business, this 1/3 business, from this pasuk. Ve'ata Rabbi Chanina shada benag. And Chanina came and ruined it. Right? He ruined it. He destroyed our raya. Ela menala. And the Gemara says, after a whole Amud of discussion back and forth, the Gemara says, where do we know this from then? The Gemara says, Kedetanya. It's different, right? Rabbi Yonatan ben Yosef Omer. Rabbi Yonatan ben Yosef says, from the pasuk that he said about the support, the miraculous support that Hashem would give by Shemitah v'Yovel, right? The pasuk says, you cannot work, you cannot plant, you cannot plow, you cannot water, you cannot work the land. But there's one big problem when you don't work the land. When you don't work the land, you have no food. You have no food, you die, right? And if you have a Shnata Shemitah adjacent to a Yovel, in the 7th cycle, you have Shemitah, and then the next year is Yovel. So you're not working for 2.5 years. I mean, in the 3rd year you start working, but until you plow and plant and gets to harvest, it's a 3rd year already, right? And the pasuk says, if you ask, v'chi tomrun, if you say, ma nochal b'shana hashvi, the obvious question, what are we going to eat? Helo nizra, we're not going to be planting, we're not going to be harvesting, we have no food. You have no food. Back in the day, over 100 years ago, 98% of the society was agricultural jobs. Now it's 2%. It's exactly reversed, right? Because the industrial revolution effects on the world, and now it's going to even change because of all this robots and AI, and this is very actually eager to see what's going to happen in 50 years from now, but or maybe not eager, but nevertheless, if you didn't have that system, and there's no silos, there's no fridges and freezers, and none of that. If you didn't have it, you died. That's what happened, right? Actually, parenthetically, an unknown fact about the greatest massacre, perhaps, in the history on a country level wide, was in Iran, actually, about 110 years ago-ish, done by the British, right? It's actually somebody that wrote a documentary with the notes and the pictures of the British soldiers in their own, and the entries of their own diary and things that they kept, which basically they had a crowd control, so to speak, a population control. It was a very good year of agriculture. The British bought all of the produce of that year from the farmers. Then they stopped the import, and they created a man-made famine. And 9 to 10 million, which is more than 50% of Iran's population, died. There's pictures of people like Holocaust look on the streets, just dead, and so on. 1 year would be like that if you didn't have things. So that prompts the question. What are you going to eat? And says the pasuk, no problem. I will command my blessing, my bracha, in the 6th year, the year going into Shemitah, and it's going to produce 3 times as much. Right? I'll support it, don't worry about it. Okay, one of the miraculous realities of the Torah, that the 6th year will produce like this. Ve'asat, last line, that the land is going to produce for 3 years. So the classic drasha the Gemara is going to give here is, don't read l'shlosh hashanim, al tikri l'shalosh ela l'shlish. Because the word says, asat tevuah, why do you have to tell me tevuah? Right? Just say, asat l'shlosh hashanim, the land makes what? Frogs? It makes food, right? So why do you have to tell me, asat tevuah l'shlosh hashanim, right? Asat et tevuah l'shlosh hashanim is coming to tell you, says the Gemara, that extra word tevuah, next, adjacent to l'shlosh hashanim, is coming to tell you that the tevuah is called when it's a shlish, when it's grown a third of its growth. That's the moment that it becomes from a little grass, right? It's now called produce, right? A wheat, a barley that has gotten to a third of its growth. Now it's the moment that you could call it tevuah. Now it's called a wheat. Now it's called a barley. Before that, it's just grass, right? It's something growing out of the ground, right? It's not called tevuah. So the name of and we go after the name of the tevuah when we are talking about masrot. You can't be maaser from the tevuah of last year to tevuah of this year. What is called tevuah? When it grows out of the ground, this is the problem. The problem is when it grows out of the ground, it's grass. It's not tevuah. So at what point, you've seen this like fast-forwarded videos of the growth of the thing, right? It comes out, and then you have the thing ready for how. At what point in this video you say, oh, this is tevuah? Says Gemara, when it has that extra word tevuah, is coming to tell you, l'shlish, that a third of its growth, that's the moment of time that you could say that this became now, from grass, it became tevuah. Fine. Wait a second. This is a very needed pasuk, right? Perhaps it's one of the proofs that the Torah is divine, that the Torah is promising something that no human being could promise, that is going to actually make tevuah for 3 years, that you're going to, until the year after the Jubilee year, right? That means you have endured the rest of the 6th year, the whole 7th year, and the 8th year, or for our purposes, the whole 49th year, and the 50th year, and now the 51st year, you're going to have the new thing, and you still have food from 3 years ago, right? That's a very much needed thing to say in the pasuk. How can you use that for a drasha? No. You have that already. The Gemara says, you need this for the information that the pasuk is giving you, that you're going to have actually food for 3 years to eat. Gemara says, no. Ketiv kra harina. There is another pasuk that tells you that you're going to have leftover foods for the entire 3 years, and that is the pasuk that says, Usratem et hashana shminit, that you're going to plant the 8th year, ve'achaltem min hatvua yashan, and you're going to be eating still from the old produce of the 6th year, ad hashana tchi'it, until the 9th year, right? For 3 years, you're going to be still eating ad bot tfuata tochlu yashan, until the new produce of the 8th year comes in the 9th year, which is, you're going to still have food from the 6th year. So the pasuk tells me that already. So therefore, I have this lishlosh hashanim. I have it extra mufne. I could make a drasha that don't read leshalosh ela leshlish, and therefore I have it. Amazing. Says the Gemara. Tanan hatam. Now that we spoke about tevuah, so we said by tevuah, by produce, we go after a third of its growth. When we talk about not being able to give masrot from 1 year on the other, right? But that's only for tevuah. That's only for produce, which means wheat, barley, that. How about other things like rice, right? Like seeds. So Tanan Hatam, we learned before we started with the Mishnah in Masrot. Now this is a Mishnah in Masechet Shvi'it Perek Bet, Ha'orez, Va'tochan, Va'paragin, Va'shumshemin, rice, millet, poppy seeds, sesame seeds, all these things, You don't go after a third. It's no third over there, right? What do you go after? By them, shehishrishu lifnei Rosh Hashanah, that they started rooting before Rosh Hashanah, mitasrin leshavar. If when the day of Rosh Hashanah comes, like Erev Rosh Hashanah at night, which is the night of Rosh Hashanah, if they already have roots, you planted them and they have already rooted, that's last year's thing, right? If they start rooting tomorrow morning, then that's next year's thing. Umutarim b'shvit, and also if it's a year, the 6th year going into the 7th year, and by the Rosh Hashanah of the beginning of Shnat HaShemitah, they already had roots in Erev Rosh Hashanah, they are mutar b'shvit. You wait for them to grow. When they finish their growth, you could have them on shvit because this is a 6th year thing. It's not a 7th year, right? Ve'im lav, and if they didn't take root before the night of Rosh Hashanah, if they did it afterwards, asurin b'shvit, of course they're going to be asur b'shvit, and also mitasrin the shana haba, and their masrot is with the upcoming year. Fine. Amar Rabba said, Amur Rabbanan, Chazal tell us, this is obviously this is a setup, a platform for a question, right? So the Rabba says, wait, we have different barometers for assessment of the years of growth for different products, depending on if they are growing on trees or on the ground, right? Vegetables versus fruits. And says Rabbah, Chazal have told us, Ilan batar chanata, that for fruits of a tree, you go after charata. After the sprouting of the fruit, when it starts, you see the flowers, you see the fruit growing, that's charata. That's for fruits of a tree. Tevuah vezetim, for produce and for olives, batar shlish, you go after a third of their growth, as we just finished explaining. Yerek, for vegetations, for vegetables, batar lekita, you go after the moment that they're ready for being harvested, you go after the harvest. Okay? So you have, what things do you have? Charata, shlish, and lekita. Those are the 3 barometers that Chazal have given us, depending on what type of product you're talking about, right? Where is hashrasha? There's no hashrasha. When Chazal talked about the different things, nobody spoke about giving roots. And this is a new thing that the Mishnah in Shvit is telling us. Where does that fit exactly, right? Says the Gemara, Hani keman shavinu Rabbanan. And this, meaning the sesame seeds, the poppy seeds, ores, v'dochen, all of that, what do Chazal compare it to? Nothing. It's not like any of the 3 items that Chazal have told us, that Rabbanan have told us. Hadar Amar Rabba. This was the question of Rabba, right? Rabba says, you give me this Mishnah in Shvit, and I know that Chazal have given us 3 different measurements, and this does not fit any of the bills. This does not fit any of the definitions. Then Rabbi himself went back and said, Mitoch sha'asuin prachin, asdi Rabbanan batar hashrasha. I said we have a practical problem here. The problem is, it should really be like vegetation, right? Or as dochen, poppy seeds, sesame seeds. They should be going after the harvest, but there's a problem. The problem is there's no season of harvest for these things. The way it operates is, these are kitniot basically, right? It's a kitniot. And the way the kitniot work is, you plant them at the same time, but they're ready at different times. You have to see a measure when they are ready to be popped out of their shell, their shaft, right? And not all of them get to that degree at the same day. So whatever is that you put in the pile, right? So you have a pile that could be comprised from things that are before Rosh Hashanah, after Rosh Hashanah. There's a whole mix, right? You have Tafshin Pei Hey, you have Tafshin Pei Dalet, Tafshin Pei Vav, everything's there, right? Versus when you usually have a pile, it's a harvest time, boom, the harvest, everything is together. Here you don't have that. You can't just go with a combined machine and just harvest everything because it doesn't grow like that. So therefore, you can't go after harvest. You have to go after hashrasha, right? In other words, by trees, they have the fruit starts. That's charata. You see the fruit starting in the thing. That's the beginning, right? By tvuah is shlish. By this, there's no shlish by poppy seeds and sesame seeds. So it should be like a vegetation that go after harvest, but it can't because there's no harvest season. So therefore, you have to go after hashrasha because you all plant them all together. You go in, you throw the things. That's all together, but then they ripen different time, different days. So says the Gemara, that's why you go after hashrasha. Abaye says, "Veispor gorno letocho v'nintzat torem min hachadash bo al hachadash shebo umin hayashan shebo al hasham shebo." Abaye says, "No problem. I have a way out. You know what you should do? Finish gathering all of them. Then you finish and pile them up. And taka, you have some tafshin pei hey, tafshin pei vav. But then at the end, give a good, nice mix. Put the outer side in the middle, and mix and do a good mush. And now you have a good mix of everything. And now you take masrot, and in what you take as masrot, you have tafshin pei hey, you have tafshin pei vav, and what's left also you have tafshin pei hey, tafshin pei vav. So you're taking from a mix on a mix, right? And it's good. Do that. And says Abaye, I don't think I'm making this up. I'm not fabricating this from my pocket. I actually have a proof. Milo Tanya, didn't we learn in the Braita? Rabbi Yossi ben Kippur, Amar Mishum Rav Shimon Shazuri. That Rabbi Yossi ben Kippur said, in the name of Rav Shimon Shazuri, Pula Mitzri. This is again talking about Kitniot, our topic. Shezra'ole Zera, that you planted it in order to produce more Kitniot. Miksato ishlish lifnei Rosh Hashanah, miksato ishlish la'achar Rosh Hashanah. Half of what you planted took root before Rosh Hashanah. Half of it took root after Rosh Hashanah. And tormin umasrin mizal zeh. You can't obviously take masrot from the ones who rooted before on the ones that rooted afterwards, and vice versa. You can't do that because they're 2 different years, right? Because we just spoke about the fact that you go after rooting, right? Taking root. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Shimon says, no problemo. You know what we're going to do? Because you can't do from different years on each other. How can you solve this problem? No problem. You bring the whole creed, the whole pile together, you mix it, you mush it well. Then you take masrot, and you have a good ratio in both of them, and you're good to go. This is Abaye. She says, well, I have a way out. And I learned it from Rabbi Shimon Shazuri, not me, Rabbi Shimon Shazuri. The man says, what are you talking about? You bring a raya from Rabbi Shimon Shazuri? Rabbi Shimon Shazuri holds something that we don't hold of. That's why he can't do that, and we can't. What is that thing? A Shas concept, again, right? Called Yesh Bila or En Bila, right? Amar le Rabbi Shimon Shazuri, comrade. You bring a raya from Rabbi Shimon Shazuri? Rabbi Shimon Shazuri Savar Yesh Bila. Rabbi Shimon Shazuri holds there is Bila. What's that? It means that can I mix something that's solid, not liquids? Liquids, everyone holds Yesh Bila. Because you mix liquid, those who know physics, every second when you put liquid together, based on the heat and cold, the molecules they're mixing together automatically. You don't have to do anything, right? You leave it there for a few minutes, the whole thing is mixed and mushed. But when solids, you have pieces of solid like kitniot, like produce, and you want to mix it and say, oh, this got mixed very well. Who says? Maybe the pile that you take as maaser has 60% from the new produce and 40% from the old, and the actual kri has 40% from the new and 61% from the old. And it turns that 10% that you messed up, or 20% that you messed up, is messed up. And you can't do that. It's not evened out 50-50, or the same exact ratio in what you take and what there is in the pile, and therefore you can't do. We paskin and bila, right? Rabbanan savri and bila. Chachamim hold there's no bila, and therefore you can't answer that. So therefore we are back to square one. Not square one really. We're back to why we go after hashrasha, after the taking root, and not after the harvest, because you can't really go after the harvest. And now the Gemara is going to continue this to the next level, which Gemara is going to discuss, the three psaks, the three chidushim of Shmuel, which Be'ezrat Hashem will do in the next shiur.